Hello and welcome to Talking About My Generation. My name is Harsh Mal, and after a 2 week break, I would like to welcome you back to our series where we explore intergenerational and intercultural trends in the many things around us that are changing. On the last show, I was actually sitting in the audience with all of you and really enjoying the chat we were having in the comments section as we watched the show together. So please keep your comments and questions coming. And to start off today, just let me know where in India or maybe the world you're joining from. I myself, I'm in New York City, where we are still awaiting the results of the election. Stick around at the end of the show today, where, as always, I will give you a preview of what we have coming next on Talking About My Generation. But on to today's show. And let me put up a photo as I introduce my guests today. So our episode looks at a question that's on everyone's mind, whether you're a parent, a mentor, someone reflecting on your own life and career. A question that often emerges is how should one discover, pursue, and commit to their passion? Rag Sethi, in his father's arms here in this photo, confronted this dilemma very early on in his life, born to celebrity parents, Geet Sethi, the renowned billiards player, and Kiran Sethi, award-winning designer and educationist. Rag has always seen close hand how passionate and committed his parents were. And in spite of trying his hands at billiards, and he's going to tell us about all of these stories himself very soon, and trying his hand at education and supporting his mom's venture, Rag could never find that inner voice to classify them as his passion until he decided to venture into music. And he is the founder of Compass Box Studio in Ahmedabad. Kiran B. Sethi is the founder and director of the Riverside School in Ahmedabad, recognized as one of the most progressive schools in the world. And it has helped fuel the passion of thousands of children, with the model now active in 60 plus countries. So Kiran and Rag Sethi, welcome to Talking About My Generation. How are you today?
We're waiting the election results as well.
We're all in the same position.
All of us are wondering what's going to happen.
When is Nevada going to be done its counting?
Well, the good news is that at least for the next half an hour or so, or our audience has put that to the back of their minds and are focused on listening to the story of the Sethis. So, Rag, I really enjoyed your column on Founding Fuel this week. And one line stood out for me where you say that I soon discovered that pros and cons are rarely part of the discourse if what you're doing makes you happy. And to me, that really neatly summed up the change in mindset that one often needs to approach such topics, especially, which can be quite consequential in one's life. So I'm looking forward to hearing both of your stories, and I'm sure our audience is as well. So without further ado, over to the both of you.
Thank you so much, Harsh. Rag, would you like to kind of just quickly share what our next 30 minutes are looking like, and what's the question to our wonderful audience? So, but first, namaste everybody from wherever you are tuning in. We hope you will find some insights that might help you make those calls about passion and profession, etc. So, Raghu, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start off with the question that we have for today. The question is, does following a passion need a plan B, a safety net, if you will? And throughout the course of this particular interaction between my mother and I, hopefully we'll give some insight as to what that question is, what some of the brief answers we have discovered along the way, and hopefully when we get some questions from you guys to sort of answer that as well. To sort of make things a little clean, we've divided this section into three components. So the first component is early moments. So these are the times in our lives that have seeded the roots of our passion in a way. And we're going to be comparing and contrasting the intergenerational difference. How was it when my mother was growing up, and how is it different or similar when I was growing up? The second component is the transition, is the pivotal point. Is like when we finally discovered what our passion is, how did we manage to manifest it into actionable passion? What were the circumstances, and what helped us facilitate that particular progression? The last, of course, is the reflection. It's going to be the learnings of what our journey has been, and and maybe hopefully those learnings would be something that you, the audience, can ask us some questions on. Is it something that you've also come to the same conclusion? Have you come to a different conclusion, perhaps? That'll be that particular component. So to start off with, early memories.
Yes.
Mom, why don't you start?
Ooh. Firstly, thank you for framing it so well. You are such a wise bacha. So it's wonderful. Okay, my early memories, and I'm talking about many years ago, but I think I was very lucky, and I keep saying that a lot of who I've become today, in hindsight, is really a lot of it I attribute to my maverick parents and my even more crazy brother and sister. I am the youngest, as you are aware, and I think I had the best of it all. So I remember a home filled with love and laughter and creativity and madness. And I think a lot of it stemmed from my dad. My father was quite a unique sort of personality. And I think from him, I learned what is possible. So he came from a time when he wanted to do painting. So he wanted to be a hoarding painter. And his father was very clear that he had to be an engineer. So in that time, I don't think you had too much of a choice, when you were the first son or the oldest. So my father was the first machine tool designer of India. He went to IIT Kharagpur, the very first batch. But the father I saw was this maverick creature. Not only would he take the harmonium and sing KL Sehgal songs on one side, he would teach us how to do the waltz and dance. He was, of course, an engineer and designer. He built the entire furniture of the home. I just saw somebody who didn't have any sort of compartments between passion, profession, and interest. And I think he gave us that opening and that opportunity to ask, to delve into crazy stuff if we wanted to. I mean, I remember, this is really interesting. I remember when I was in 10th grade, so the boys started calling home, and there was just this one telephone call in the middle of the, in the living room.
Yeah.
We didn't have mobile phones, Mr. Rag Sethi. We had that one phone call that you had to dial.
I grew up with that too.
Oh, yeah. So when the call would come, my father would pick up the phone, and there would be like the voice saying, "Hello, can we speak to Kiran?" and everything. And my father would kind of say, "Yes, of course you must." And I'm saying, "Papa, what are you saying?" He said, "No, you must speak." So I think in many ways he opened up that space, to enjoy life. But there were two interesting anecdotes I'd like to talk to you about really what you talked about, planting the seeds of what is possible. The first, I am told, okay, I am all of 2 years old, and we used to go to our monthly dinner at Koshi's restaurant. There was this fantastic restaurant in Bangalore called Koshi's, which had the jukebox. And apparently I loved this particular song that I would always want. And I would ask Papa to put 25 paisa into the jukebox and hear that song. And me being me, would take my little chunni and start dancing all through the restaurant. And my brother and sister Punan Pange said, "Papa, tell her to sit down. She's embarrassing everybody." And my father would say, "No, let her dance." So I think that freedom and that trust in your child was possibly the first introduction of what I could be. The second is an even more telling sort of anecdote. And the second was really about this idea that I went to an all-girls school, okay? And in an all-girls school, I was in grade 7, so I would have been around 11 or 12 years old. And we had to do a project on animals. And all the other girls started taking, like a goldfish or a butterfly or whatever, or an earthworm. I decided, no, we have to study a snake. Think about that, okay? Think about that, around 40 years ago. Then coming home and telling my Papa, I have to buy a snake.
Yeah.
And imagine, there was big drama at home. My brother and sister saying, "Papa, the snake will be at home, or we will stay at home." All that drama. My father said, "No, we'll go." And he came with me all the way to the other end of Bangalore to buy that snake. I had earned some 20 rupees, and he paid 2 rupees more to buy the box. And all he told me is, "Beta, you have to look after it. If you cannot look after it, we must let it go."
Right.
So I think that's really what my understanding of upbringing and how important those early memories are to shape your worldview. So those are my understanding of home. What about you, Raghu?
No,
How
true.
about us, your papa and me? What wonderful parents we are. Please share.
The one side note I'd like to give our viewers right now is that image of a 2-year-old Kiran B. Sethi dancing around shamelessly has continued till this day. So whenever we go to a theater or a restaurant and her favorite song comes up, she'll start dancing, and we've sort of become used to that procession at this point.
Embarrassing.
Yeah. I think one of the earliest memories I have about growing up in a family like my family. I mean, we've got you as my mom, and of course Geet Sethi as my father. Was that anything that I wanted to do in terms of exploring something, there was never no as a response to that. I remember coming to you and saying like, "Oh, I want to try tap dancing," and that was like, "Okay, fine, yeah, you want to do tap dancing? Let's find out what the clothing looks like, or what kind of shoes you need to wear." And you also organized a show for me, I remember, because of that. So it was interesting to see that regardless of what I asked for, whether it be tap dancing, we used to do performances in theater, listening to music with dad. There was never no as a response to that. And kind of going and alluding to your story with Nanaji, where Nanaji came with you to get the snake, you were with me, helping me along each of those ways. So I think that's definitely something that you took from your dad and sort of into my experience over here. So I remember that very distinctly, and I remember that since we had done so much theater, I ended up taking AP theater when I was in Woodstock in high school. So for 11th and 12th, I ended up taking theater, and I think I owe it to that experience where we used to just spend doing performances. With dad, I remember listening to music. My dad was heavily into hi-fi systems back in the day. So he had an amplifier, he had a subwoofer, he had these 2 Tannoy speaker towers, and we used to just listen to music. Sit down, put the CD in. We used to listen to Dire Straits, Queen, Mark Knopfler, Sunset Boulevard, Michael Jackson, and we used to just quietly sit down and listen to music. And I think I, again, owe it to that experience, to my appreciation of music right now, I think. And those two have been very important anecdotes that I can remember. And yeah.
Yeah, I think when we kind of were talking about this session, we wanted to talk about the pressure of tuition classes and how that didn't necessarily come into your, it wasn't an expectation or the pressure of tuition that kind of helped you understand that whilst academics is important, schooling is important, there was an equal important for the rest of who we are as human beings, just exploring all our possible manifestations, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for kids, from a parent's perspective, filling up the kids' free time and allocating it with tuitions and sports classes and stuff like that is such an important part of growing up. And I don't remember having an allocation of tuition classes specifically. It was always, we've got some free time, let's do a drama together, let's do a fashion show together, let's learn about tap dancing. And it was always filled up with that time. I think that started the whole process of, if I want to try out something, I will try out something, and there's no barrier to that.
True. Lovely. I think that kind of allows us to go into our second segment of pivoting or transitions. And I think I'd like to kind of start by saying that, in my time, and I think it's less now, but in my time, if you happen to be good in studying, you either had to become a doctor or an engineer. And I became a designer. I mean, just look at that. And I remember there were these really interesting Punjabi aunties who would tell my mother, "Arey ha, Kiran's gone to design. She must not be very good in studies." That was the log kya kahenge wala funda, right? And at no point did my parents ever put that log kya kahenge, what will people say, pressure onto the choices Poonam, my sister, of course, me and Pankaj took. I think that was really important. And the second incident, again, of that, the idea of that log kya kahenge and that pressure. Also, when I got married before Poonam, my sister, got married. And I remember, again, coming from a very Punjabi or very, traditional thing, younger daughter should not get married before. And all of those my parents debunked. None of those were like sacrosanct, or those were not set in stone, and you could kind of question those those norms that society puts in. I think that freedom to not be weighed down by the pressure of what people say is a very, very liberating feeling to have. And therefore you just get that courage deeply within you to try out and test, because you're liberated from the pressure of societal or peer pressure which would otherwise come. And so I think for me that was a massive pivot, which eventually kind of shaped the choice I took about, starting education. But I'll come to that. But you had a very interesting pivot after the 12th, right? What about that?
Yeah, for me, because when I went to Woodstock, it was the first time, I think, academically at least, I was allowed to select a bunch of different subjects. For the first time, I could take literature and calculus and physics and chemistry, world history, religions of Indian origin. I mean, you name it, I wanted to sort of select it. But in the process of doing all of that, I was confused in terms of what I wanted to do in college specifically. Sure. So I remember after school, I was not ready to apply to college because I was not sure in terms of what I wanted to do. And my perception was that if I'm applying to college, I have to apply to college knowing what I need to do, whether it be engineering or, medicine or law or music or education, doesn't matter. That needs to be set. And I was confused. So I took a gap year after high school and worked with you during the DFC program, working at school full-time, trying to get a sense of like, okay, if education is what I would like to do, maybe this can become my test bed to prototype whether or not this is something that I see myself studying. So taking a gap year was very unusual at the time. I think I was the only student from my batch. I think it was me and maybe one other person out of a class of 80 students who took a gap year. Everybody else went from high school directly to college because there's that deadline also, right? I mean, you have to get your MBA by 23, you have to get your MBA, or 24, you have to get your MBA. So not having that deadline as a pressure, as like you were saying, clearly helped me, have some breathing space to be like, okay, I don't know what I do. I don't know what I want to do right now, but it's okay. I think I'll eventually find out. I just need some time to try out different things. So I took a gap year there, yeah.
True. And I think what in hindsight, again, and I keep saying that insights come with hindsight, the idea of that linear, stereotypical journey that we all embark on, that we will first go to school and then we will finish high school, then we'll have to immediately go to college and then we have to get a job. It should be a safe job. You get married, you have all of these milestones which are preset. Yeah. And to break a preset mold needs two things. A, of course, you as a student or as an individual to feel confident that I am not losing anything. I keep saying it's a gift year, not a gap year, right? It's a gift to yourself that you get to say, oh, I can take some time. I can breathe. I don't have to fall into this pressure of conforming to somebody else's view of who I am. Did it ever put any, did you feel that you lost anything in doing this, or did you find that it offered you space and time to kind of really start figuring out your next steps? Because you still went undecided. Right?
Yeah. So after
that,
after that year, when we finally decided which college I was going to go into, I was still not sure in terms of what I wanted to major in because I had such varied interests. So when applying, fortunately, an American liberal arts college education allows you to go in undecided and you can then figure it out once you're there. But I remember thinking when I joined college that I was a year behind. I was a year behind everybody else because everybody else was at least a year, 2 years younger to me at that point for the same year, for the same sort of year that we were progressing in our graduate degree. But now looking back at it, I don't see it that way at all, because now looking back, I can be like, I made choices to major in education and to minor in music because I had that gap year as a buffer period to at least get some clarity as to what I wanted. For those first 2 years, I did exactly what I did in Woodstock. I took one course in everything because I was undecided. So I took anthropology, I took mathematics, I took physics, I took philosophy, really wanted to fully consume myself with what college had to offer. And then eventually decided, okay, you know what? I think this is what I need to major in. This is what I need to minor in, and kind of went ahead.
I remember we used to have these conversations and Baba, when will you find something? Baba, will you actually focus on something? Right? So whilst, and I don't want the audience to feel that, it's always great to meander and just find this kind of meandering path. I don't think I would like for them to feel that that's really what we're trying to say. And I think there's a deep amount of work ethics that needs to come. And I think for us, I remember both Papu and me constantly telling you and Jazz that, whilst whatever you do, boss, you have to commit 100%. Your work ethics have to be on point, right? In terms of, just making sure you finish, you get quality work out there, you have an integrity to the work you've done, whatever it is. So while meandering in a way sometimes is a luxury and you can kind of take that path, at no point was it the substitute was not that I could do just anything and be lazy about it. And I think for me, that is something that, did you learn that? I mean, was that pretty evident about, just the ethics of what we were doing?
Yeah, I think so. And, it'd be really cool to see if the audience chimes in for any questions at this point. I think the one question I had in that particular moment in time was that choosing something right now in college, would that predetermine what I would do for the rest of my life? Is that something that if I'm selecting to do education, it's set in stone? Okay, that's it. There's no change happening. And I was very fortunate, again, for the viewers who maybe stumbled across my column, I alluded to having witnessed two different kinds of passions. One passion that was like my father, which was like all-consuming and obsessive. Right from the start, he knew what he wanted to do and continued it on for 40 years. And then I had you, who, while the passion was there for design as a whole, it changed and morphed from having a design studio to starting a school in your mid-30s. So if that was my benchmark of mid-30s, and I knew that I was in no hurry. So I had you as a idea to be like, okay, fine. If I don't have it figured out by 22, 23, it's okay. I just need to work at it.
Yeah, but I didn't know I was going to do that pivot, right? It was because of you.
Yeah, exactly.
You were born into my life. I was most happy running a design studio, being a lady of leisure and doing stuff at my time. And I think in some ways I was being prepared for this again, immersive. So in many ways, what Papu did, what Geet got at 11 and then went on to do that for 35 years, an all-consuming obsession, I feel in many ways I was also getting prepared to be able to finally start this journey of now it's been 20 years since running the school and starting, say, Design for Change, etc. But it became all-consuming. And I think somewhere eventually the passion has to become all-consuming for you to continue to have the stamina to keep doing it. I keep saying you have to be worthy of a passion. Passion doesn't necessarily come to everybody. And so the question I'm trying to ask you now in say now our third segment that we will be venturing into is, how did you then find Compass Box and music in times when music is not, again, people still look at music as a hobby. Yep. How did you convert in your head the idea that it's not hobby, but it is a purposeful profession and deeply passionate?
See, I think this goes back to the question in terms of, does following a passion need a plan B, right? There was no plan B for Dad.
No plan B, yes.
There was no plan B for you either when you decided, okay, this is what I want to do. It was that. It was not, okay, I've got that as a safety net behind, so I don't need to worry about it. So that plan B is a scary option, actually, right? The moment you have identified that there's this plan B, you can very easily, relegate your passion and go to this plan B that's over there. So I think for me, that transition happened fairly recently. I mean, I've only been in music for the last 3.5 years. So it's very recently where I've gone through this transition. And I think one of the key identifiers is having, again, two parents who are so passionate about something definitely helps, because I know firsthand what obsession looks like. So when I started seeing that trait in myself, I kind of knew exactly what it was because I saw it in the two of you.
Okay.
Having that model ready in my head, so I wasn't questioning it more than I would have if I hadn't seen the two of you be obsessed, right? So having that as a model, I knew when I was spending more time in music and I was spending hours that I couldn't even count, I was like, wait, I've seen this somewhere before. So
that's true.
Yeah, I think that was an important identifier for me.
Oh, I love what you're saying, because you're saying that the idea of seeing it being being lived out. I think somewhere you're not being told about passion. You're not being saying, beta, you must study hard or you must do this. I think you saw it being lived out on a daily basis, where you saw the failures or the successes, and you saw the struggle, and you saw the hours that were spent. Most people don't see that. Yeah, especially if you look at a place like, say, sports, you only see the victories and all the losses that happen. You don't see the backstory of it. And I think you were witness to all the backstory, and you're seeing behind the scenes of what happens when, say, Papu lost a match or things didn't happen at school or whatever. And I think it maybe in a way prepared you that this would be all of it if you want to go through yours. Yeah. And are you then ready for that journey, which would be the long hours and the sleepless nights and the loss of sometimes confidence, and you need stamina? Oh, that's a very interesting point that you share. Yeah.
The interesting thing is I did succumb to that, that pressure in terms of what needs to be early on when I was 12, 13.
What about the billiards, Wala, you talked about? Yeah.
So I'm saying that I did succumb to that pressure in terms of the society telling me, okay, you know what, typically the son follows the father's profession. Typically. I mean, it still holds true to this day. It's kind of normal for sons to join their father's business or father's profession. So I remember thinking that it was an obligation for me to do that, even though none of you guys said that. I remember very clearly, Dad was not insistent at all for being like, okay, yeah, you should play billiards now. No, yeah, there was never a conversation I had with Dad. So when I decided, okay, I should pursue billiards perhaps. And I remember playing billiards, and I played semi-professionally, you could say, at age 12, because I played at the Gujarat State Open. I played at some exhibition matches in Mumbai. And I realized that this is not.
I have to tell you that, by the way, I don't know whether you know this, but when you started, Papu would tell me, he said, my God, Raj's a natural.
Yeah, I remember.
Superb stance. Yeah,
He said to me that my stance was really, really
good.
Yes. And I use that as okay, and in a way that feeds into that perception that you are naturally, this is the natural progression, right? If I'm so naturally good at it, then I should continue with this. And I realized I wasn't designed for it. Let's just put it that way, because I think that the pressure of conforming to this idea that, I am my father's son, so I need to be as ambitious and as obsessive about billiards as my dad was, and I wasn't. So that was a pivotal moment for me also, when I finally realized, okay, I don't think I'm cut out for.
No, but why did you give it up?
Yeah, so I played, both Dad and I played an exhibition match in Mumbai, and at the end of that match, there was a Doordarshan interview, I think. And the interviewer asked, he has this lengthy interview with my dad. And then the first question he asked me, not how did you play, how well did you play, how many hours of practice did you, none of that. The first question was, when do you think you'll beat your father? And 13-year-old me got sick and tired of all this
seriously
comparison. So I just said, you know what, I don't think that's ever going to happen, because I quit. So it was a very reactionary moment in my life, but I think ultimately I realized that this is not something that I'm set out to do.
Yeah. No, I think this is great. And I think as we wrap up, I think just 3 things that I have learned, and I don't know whether that's the same for you. One is, of course, this, if growing up, you are released from this log kya kahenge, or what will other people think, or what will they say pressure, you give your child the freedom to be able to feel, realize their authentic self. And I think that's such a great gift you give a child. Right. I think the second thing, if you do find whatever you are doing, you have to be really worthy of it. You have to commit to the long hours. You have to understand that you need stamina. It's not just the fun and fluff, like you said. It is all of that. And I think that worthiness comes from your own deep desire to understand that space more. And then you will find that key for the long, for the marathon race of a passion. And I think the thing I like the third one you talked about, no hurry. I don't think right now we have a pressure. Oh, you must find a passion. You must find a passion. And I think it needs to bake its way and find its way. But if you give the opportunities for children to explore, to test stuff, to try out, to prototype, I feel we're more likely then to be able to live out who we were set out to be. So I think, any last words from you before we call Harsh back?
No, I think that's about it. That idea of finding a passion and more importantly, committing to a passion. People expect a sprint. People expect that it's going to be this quick dash to the finish line. And as I think everybody who has had an obsessive passion knows, that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You have to be ready for the long haul. It's very rarely going to be a sprint. So I think that's probably the closing remarks from my side.
True. Lovely. So Harsh, can we call you back?
Hi guys, I'm back. Thanks so much. That was such a riveting discussion. I mean, this is a topic that's, of course, all of us at some point negotiate in our lives, and to see both of you speak on it with such clarity, and of course your stories this was so much fun to listen to. So I'll pose a question to you, and I'll start with a question for both of you, but Rag, I'll come to you first, which is tell me about what you see as the role of qualifications or certifications, let's say, on this journey when you're deciding to choose this path. Did you ever feel that need for a degree or certification, say when you were making the switch to music?
So I had a certification to teach. I had an education degree. In fact, in that way, I'm more qualified than my mother.
Yes, I have no qualifications. Rag, don't tell this to everybody who's watching. I'm running a school.
I was qualified to teach. I done my major was in. I did my bachelor's in integrated educational studies. When I built a studio, I had no background in audio engineering. I had no background in music production. I most definitely didn't do like a certification course or anything like that. Everything that I needed to know was available on YouTube for the most part, and reading. Like, I read a lot about what I needed to achieve. And the beauty about that process was that I knew exactly what the next question was. So my journey was just a series of questions that I was answering for myself. So no, you don't need a degree, at least to be a musician and to be a producer. Does it help? Yeah, I'm sure it helps, but I'm proof of the fact that you can have a degree in something as specialized as music production without a degree. And I think the same is true for my mom.
Yeah. I mean, I would, whilst I'm not saying it's not a good thing to have it, I'm at no point am I telling anybody in the audience, please for leapfrog education. I think mastery is fantastic, but mastery doesn't have to necessarily come from a degree, right? Mastery comes from your own pursuit of understanding. And I think that's really what gives you more clarity and more just insights into what you do. So yes, it's not like an either or. I mean, you can still develop deep mastery and deep commitment to an idea without necessarily holding a degree.
Yeah. And I mean, sorry, yeah, I just want to say, like, does it help in that process? Yeah, there's no doubt about it. But at least from a music side, when somebody's approaching me for either a job, I'm not going to be asking for the degree. I'm going to be asking for their body of work. What have they done? I'll see that. That's my certification in a way. It's what have they done? What is their portfolio?
So I want to take something from what you said, Rag, and pose that as a question to Kiran as an educator. So as Rag talks about it, a lot of his pivot, so to say, was through self-learning. And, because he had the curiosity, he went and sought those resources to gain that knowledge, to set him on his path. So, and as an educator, and this is you speaking to the parents and mentors in our audience today, how would you, what your advice on creating an environment for students, for learners, so that not to teach them specifically things, but to create that curiosity in them?
There's I keep saying this, not necessarily in just the idea of passion, etc. I keep saying is that all of us have ability. Quality is a learned idea. So ability is inherent, right? Quality and excellence is a learned trait. So that ability is in every human being, and then you live out that in the first 2 years of your life on the planet. You go from sitting, standing, crawling, laughing, and all in the first 2 years, and then we send them to school and say, now listen, now sit down, now keep quiet, and we start rewarding, like I said, compliance over conversation. Most education is told if you're good, and we think that good means keeping quiet, then you will manage your life. So, and then for 15 years we do that. And I think we then get surprised, and my God, why are our graduates so unprepared for life? But it's come for 15 years being told, keep quiet and listen. So I believe that our responsibility to children is to ensure they have the opportunities to test out who they are. And it comes from exploration and iteration and social constructivism. But it's a difficult task because it's so much easier to teach for compliance. It's so much easier to teach a class where everybody's quiet, right? I mean, suddenly if you have an opinion, I have to listen to you. My God, that's just too much work, right? And even parents, I think a lot of parenting is out of fear. And that fear is natural. I don't think that fear is unfounded, but your fear is what you infuse in your child. And fear is not the best gift to give, even if it's well thought out. Right. So whilst it's counterintuitive to say that I want the best for my child, the best might not be what you want for your child, right? So somewhere we have to be able to have that deep trust and confidence in who our children are, and that's a tough place. It's not an easy answer.
Yeah, and I think the fear that you talk about also plays into. This is something that both of you did discuss, which is the plan B and the role that plays in your decision making. So Kiran Charles in our audience, he says that he's unconvinced by that point that both of you talked about of not having a plan B or not letting that determine your direction. So how would you reassure him?
It just is always an exit plan. A plan B is always allowing you an exit before you really commit. It's like I'll get married, but then I will also divorce. It just doesn't make sense, right? You don't keep divorce as a plan B for marriage. You commit. And it's only that deep commitment to an idea that allows you to really figure out whether you're right for it, right? So when you have a plan B, you always are telling yourself that, okay, agar ye nahi chalega, to wo hai. Yeah. And I hear a lot of parents saying that, music theek hai, lekin manager bhi banega. Bacha will be manager. And in this half-hearted attempt for anything, it's not passion then you have to you don't have to kill yourself to say, boss, this is my passion. Then you say that, okay, it's I'm interested in something and then I will pursue it. I genuinely feel that you have to bungee jump into an idea. You really have to kind of let go and trust that you will have the skills, you will learn it, you will be. And that's the deep set of skills you need to kind of be able to learn. Otherwise, half-hearted chalta hai thing never really does anybody any good.
Yeah, and I think this particular topic is especially relevant today because one of the things that the pandemic did is sort of shook everyone out of their routines and their almost. An unkind way to call it is the tunnel vision of your path that you already had and said, is this something that I really care about, or is it time that I make a switch? And another thing that the pandemic has done, and Rag, I'm going to bring this question to you, which has put the idea of a gap year in the minds of a lot of students.
Yeah.
So, because of course the pandemic has inserted that uncertainty into the lives of young people. So any words of encouragement or maybe caution for someone who is considering a gap year?
When we grow up, we naturally hear, "What are you going to do when you grow up?" as a question. And to ask a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old what they're going to be when they grow up, it puts that pressure right from there. Quite frankly, I think. So by the time they come to 12th grade and they graduate, the first thing that they think about is, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And 18-year-olds, I mean, think about it from a physiological and like cognitive standpoint. Children at that age are impulsive. Children at that age, and I'm talking about just purely cognitively, they lack the ability to make judgment calls at that age. I mean, and we know this, that the prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped for that age. So to have such a strong career-defining move at that point in time is a very scary prospect, I think. And the one thing that a gap year provides is a testing ground. Like it was for me, at least. It was a 1-year prototype phase for me to try out the thing that I thought I would like to do. And you know, a lot of people will come out of that gap year either because of variety, because they want to spend 1 year and do many different things, which is great. They'll spend 1 year doing one thing only. And within that time, they will get clarity regardless of what decision they choose. If they're doing that thing for 1 year only and they realize, okay, you know, I'm not enjoying this at all. I had this romanticized idea of what being an investment banker might be like, and now I don't have that perception anymore. Or it'll codify it. It'll be like, yes, this is exactly what I want to do, and they're going in with a stronger purpose to it. Yeah. The other way, of course, is that, okay, I don't know what I want to do. I want to try like 5 different things, so that when I go to college, or so that when I start my job directly, you don't have to go to college, I'm more sure about what it is I'd like to do. So I think that gap year can be a powerful direction compass tool for, if you use it wisely. Of course, you can take a gap year and vacation and just spend your time doing just traveling the world, which is also, I guess,
which is good.
Yeah, which is also a compass in its way. But I think people should look at gap years for that purpose. But they have to go in knowing that that's what they're providing. The gap year is providing them that. So I think that's important.
Thanks for that. And I'm sure a lot of people will take real inspiration from that. And I am conscious of the time. So if to our audience, if you have any more questions, I mean, keep putting them in the Facebook comments below. We'll try and have the Sethis respond to them over on the Slack channel after our show. Yes. So and thanks to both of you, Rag and Kiran, for joining us for such a great discussion. And I think, Rag, you'll be really interested in what we have for our next show, which is Shlok Paul and Josie Paul will join us to talk about what music means to them. And they're doing this as neither of them are musicians, but more of what the role that music plays in their lives. And as a musician myself, I'm really excited for this episode.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So Shlok is not a musician. He finds creativity and expression in his scientific pursuits, and was part of the team that created the climate clock that's up in Union Square here in New York. It's a real landmark in the city over here. And Josie Paul is an advertising man. The Economic Times ranks him as among the most influential people in Indian advertising. So tune in to hear from the father-son duo on November 21st at 7:30 p.m. India time. And once again, Kiran and Rag Sethi, thank you so much for a great show. And to our audience, we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye. God bless. Stay safe.